Caleb had just turned 16. His father had surprised him with a first-class ticket for a weekend trip to visit his cousins in Chicago. It wasn't his first time flying, but it was his first time flying first class, and he was genuinely excited. He stepped onto the plane with his boarding pass in hand, politely greeted the flight attendant, and found his seat near the front of the cabin. As he settled in, he placed his backpack under the seat, fastened his seatbelt, and started scrolling through his playlist. That's when the flight attendant walked up. Her tone was sharp, and her expression stiff. "Excuse me, young man," she said. "This section is for first-class passengers only." Caleb looked up, confused. "Yes, ma'am. This is my seat. 2A. She looked down at the boarding pass he held out, didn't even take it from him, then glanced at him again like she didn't believe it. "I'm going to need you to move to the back," she said. "You must have boarded the wrong section." Caleb stayed calm. "No, ma'am. My ticket says 2A. It's first class." She didn't even hide her skepticism. "I've flown long enough to know when something's not right," she replied, still standing over him. "We can deal with this quietly, or I can call security." Passengers nearby started shifting in their seats. Some pretended not to hear. A few looked directly at Caleb, some with curiosity, others with judgment. His voice stayed steady, but quieter now. "I'm not moving. My dad booked this seat. I have every right to be here." But the attendant wasn't listening. She snapped her fingers and said, "Up, now." Caleb's face turned red, but he stood up slowly. He didn't want a scene. He moved to the aisle and the attendant pointed toward the back of the plane. He didn't argue anymore. He just walked. All the way to the last row, he sat down in a middle seat that smelled like old snacks and cleaning spray. He stared forward, trying not to let the lump in his throat rise any higher. Then he remembered something. His dad had told him, "If anything goes wrong, call me. No matter what it is." So he pulled out his phone and sent a single message. "Need help. Flight 682. She moved me from first class. Boarding pass said 2A." He hit send. He waited. 5 minutes passed, then 10. Suddenly the plane stopped moving. The pilot's voice came through the speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing a slight delay. Please stay in your seats while we address a situation." Caleb's phone buzzed. A new message appeared. "Stay calm. Don't speak to anyone. I'm handling it." It came from his dad. Back in first class, the same flight attendant stood at the front, smiling and chatting with a passenger. Then a flight supervisor stepped onto the plane. Behind him, 2 airport security officers followed. The supervisor walked directly toward the attendant. "Can I speak with you in the galley, please?" She looked surprised. "Of course, is something wrong?" They disappeared behind the curtain. Whispers followed. No one could hear what was being said, but the flight attendant didn't return right away. Caleb sat still. He didn't want to move, didn't want to draw more attention to himself. But passengers were whispering now. A man across the aisle glanced over and gave him a nod, like he knew something wasn't right. Then, the pilot came back over the intercom. "Unfortunately, we're going to have to deboard the aircraft. We'll provide more information shortly. Please gather your belongings." The entire cabin groaned. People started standing up, annoyed and frustrated. But Caleb didn't move. He didn't have to. A woman in a sharp navy blue blazer walked down the aisle. She stopped right in front of him. "Caleb, I'm here on behalf of the airline. Can you come with me, please?" He stood up slowly. Everyone turned to watch. He followed her to the front of the plane. As he stepped into the jet bridge, a man in a suit was waiting, tall, serious, and calm. He smiled at Caleb. "You okay, son?" That was his dad. Not just any dad. The man standing there was Malcolm Winters, chairman of the board of directors of the very airline they were flying on. He turned to the woman in the blazer. "Has she been removed from the crew list?" "Yes, sir. Effective immediately." Caleb looked up at his dad. "I didn't do anything wrong." "You didn't have to," his dad replied. "She did." Passengers were now pouring out behind them, still unaware of what had just happened. But whispers were growing. People were connecting the dots. The plane stayed grounded. The crew was swapped out. And Caleb? He got back into first class, this time escorted by the same airline executive team that handled VIPs and celebrities. The new attendant greeted him by name. "Welcome back, Mr. Winters. Can I get you anything?" He smiled and said, "I'm good, thanks." And as the plane finally took off, the internet was already catching fire with the story. As the plane climbed into the sky, Caleb leaned back in his seat. His heart was still beating fast, but his father's calm presence had reassured him. Across the aisle, a businessman kept glancing at him, the kind of look that said, "I saw what happened, and I want to know more." But Caleb didn't say a word. He put his headphones on and stared out the window. Meanwhile, back on the ground, things were moving fast. Malcolm Winters, CEO, board chairman, and a major shareholder of the airline, wasn't just Caleb's dad. He was also someone whose phone calls were never ignored, especially not by the airline's executive team. And today, they were getting more than just a call. They were getting orders. The flight attendant who had kicked Caleb out of his seat was now sitting in a private room inside the terminal. She was no longer on duty. She had been pulled off the flight, and the airline's operations manager had started asking her questions. She tried to explain it all, said she was following protocol, that she didn't mean to offend, that maybe she'd made a mistake. But it was too late. There were witnesses, camera footage, and of course, the fact that she never even checked his boarding pass. Malcolm had already made sure that the review was being handled by a third-party HR investigator. He didn't want special treatment. He wanted accountability. Back in the air, Caleb's phone buzzed again. It was a message from his dad. "Media has it. Don't post anything yet. Focus on your weekend. I'll handle this." Caleb didn't fully understand what "media has it" meant. But by the time the flight landed, he found out. As he stepped into the arrivals area, his cousin Lena was already waiting. She gave him a quick hug. "Dude," she said, "you're everywhere right now. TikTok, Instagram, X, even the news. What happened on that plane?" He looked at her, surprised. "Wait, already?" She held up her phone. There it was. A post from a passenger who had recorded the confrontation. The caption read, "This teen got kicked out of first class because the attendant assumed he didn't belong. Turns out his dad is the CEO of the airline. The whole plane got grounded." Caleb's face was blurred, but people were already talking. The comments section exploded. This is why people need to be careful with assumptions. Respect is free. She paid the price. Good for the kid. Glad someone powerful stood up for him. By the next morning, it was trending. The airline had released a statement. "We are aware of an incident involving a passenger and a crew member on Flight 682. We are conducting a full investigation and taking appropriate internal actions. Our commitment to equality and fairness is non-negotiable." But the internet didn't need a full investigation to form its opinion. People started tagging the airline in videos, making reaction clips, even sharing their own travel experiences, some of them disturbingly similar. One user posted, "This is exactly what happened to my brother last year." They didn't believe he had a first-class ticket either. This story hit hard. Another said, "Not surprised. This happens way more than it should. Glad this one didn't get swept under the rug." Caleb, though, didn't post anything. Not yet. His dad had told him to stay quiet for now. Not because he was hiding anything, but because they were preparing something much bigger. 2 days later, Malcolm held a press conference. It wasn't flashy. No bright lights or media circus. Just a calm, firm, professional message delivered from the airline's main headquarters. He didn't mention Caleb by name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. "I have always believed that every passenger, no matter who they are, deserves to be treated with dignity and respect," Malcolm said. "This company was built on that principle, and when we fail to uphold it, we take responsibility. That's what's happening now." He announced new training for flight crews, new oversight for in-flight incidents, and a new customer advocacy team focused specifically on handling bias-related complaints. But the part that grabbed everyone's attention came at the end. "We're not canceling anyone," he said. "We're changing systems. One person made a decision, it was the wrong one. But the bigger problem is how often these decisions go unchecked. That ends now." That one statement was shared by every major news outlet. And while the internet was still debating, Caleb was just trying to have a normal weekend with his cousins. He wasn't trying to be famous. He wasn't trying to prove a point. He just wanted to fly in the seat his dad had bought for him, like anyone else would. That Monday morning, his phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't his dad. It was a text from the airline's new customer care director, someone who had just been appointed by Malcolm. "We'd like to invite you to be part of a youth advisory panel. Your voice matters, and we want to hear it. No pressure, just an invitation." Caleb didn't reply right away. He wasn't sure what to say. Then another message came through, this one from someone at school. "Saw what happened. Proud of you, man. You stayed calm. That takes strength." He smiled. For the first time since the flight, he actually felt proud of how he handled it. Not because the plane got grounded, not because of his dad's position, but because when someone tried to take something from him that he had earned, he didn't fold. He just stood his ground. And that changed everything. The next few days were strange for Caleb. He wasn't used to people recognizing him. But now it was happening. In the airport, at a sandwich shop, even at school. Some folks were subtle, whispering to each other, pointing just a little. Others came right up to him. "You're that kid, right? The one from the plane?" At first, he didn't know how to respond. Was that a good thing or a bad thing? He wasn't trying to be known. He wasn't looking for attention. But the way people reacted, it was different. It was full of respect. Not pity, not fame. Just respect. Caleb's teachers treated him a little differently, too. A few gave him knowing nods. One of them pulled him aside after class. "You handled yourself with maturity," she said. "A lot of adults wouldn't have stayed as calm as you did." He appreciated that. It felt honest. Not like they were just being nice. And it made him realize something. Maybe this whole thing wasn't just a mess. Maybe it was also a chance to show people how to respond to unfair treatment without losing control. But while he was adjusting to this sudden attention, things behind the scenes were heating up. A former flight attendant, who had worked for the airline for 7 years, posted a long message on social media. She didn't name names, but her post caught fire. "There's a culture issue, not just a one-person mistake. I've seen crew members assume a young black man in a hoodie didn't belong in first class. I've seen passengers mistreated for no reason other than their appearance. It's time for change. Other airline employees began sharing stories too. Quiet ones, honest ones. Not every story was about racism. Some were about classism, ageism, or just how people in uniforms sometimes let power go to their heads. But they all circled back to the same truth. What happened to Caleb wasn't rare. It was just visible, and now that it was visible, it couldn't be ignored. The airline's board of directors held an emergency meeting. It wasn't just about Caleb anymore. It was about public trust, legal risk, and their brand's reputation. They knew they had to act fast, not with a PR stunt, but real change. So they brought in outside consultants, experts in bias, inclusion, and public accountability, and they weren't there to sugarcoat anything. One of them sat in front of the executive team and laid it out clearly. You're losing the next generation of flyers if you don't fix this. You're telling young people, especially young black travelers, that they're not welcome in the most expensive seats on your planes. Whether that's what you meant or not doesn't matter. That's what happened. Malcolm listened closely. He didn't flinch. He already knew it. And he had plans in motion that were bigger than anyone realized. Meanwhile, Caleb finally replied to the message he got from the new customer care director. He didn't agree to anything right away. He just asked a question. If I join this youth panel, can I say whatever I really feel? The response came quickly. Yes, that's the whole point. He agreed to meet with them for one conversation. Nothing formal, just a sit-down. When the day came, he walked into a sleek, glass-walled office in the airline's headquarters. Not alone, his aunt came with him, just to be sure he wasn't being put on display. The room was filled with a few other teenagers, all from different backgrounds. One girl had been through a traumatic delay where she'd missed her graduation. A boy shared how security always seemed to randomly check him when he flew. Another teen was a wheelchair user who'd been made to feel like a burden on board. Everyone had a story, and for the first time, Caleb wasn't the only one sharing. He told his story last. He didn't yell. He didn't exaggerate. He just explained what happened and how it made him feel. Embarrassed, disrespected, and for a moment, powerless. Then he told them the part people didn't see. I didn't want to call my dad. I didn't want to be the kid who only got justice because his father's important. That's not the kind of help most people can get. I want the next kid in my seat to be treated right, whether his dad is a CEO or not. The room was silent. Then the customer care director nodded. That's exactly why we want you here. What started as a one-time meeting turned into a real project. The youth panel wasn't just a public gesture. It became a working group. Every month, they met with leaders from the airline. They reviewed training materials. They helped rewrite scripts used during onboarding for new staff. They gave real feedback, blunt and honest, on how passengers should be treated. Caleb didn't love every meeting. Some were frustrating. Some felt slow. But he stuck with it. And the flight attendant from his flight, she sent an email. Not through the airline, directly, through her attorney. She didn't try to make excuses. She didn't ask for forgiveness right away. She just said, I reacted before thinking. I saw someone I didn't expect in that seat and made an assumption. I should have followed the process. I should have treated you with the same respect I'd give anyone else. I'm sorry. Caleb read the message a few times. He didn't know what to do with it at first, but eventually he wrote back. I appreciate your apology. What happened hurt, but I hope this leads to change, not just for me, but for everyone else who flies with your company. That was all he said. He didn't blast it online. He didn't use it to build a following. He just kept showing up. To meetings, to school, to life. A few months later, the airline launched a new internal campaign. They called it "Every Seat Matters." It wasn't just a slogan. It came with changes in how complaints were handled, how crew members were evaluated, and how passengers were supported. Caleb was invited to speak at the internal launch. He wore a simple shirt, no logos, no suit. He walked up to the mic and looked at the crowd of airline staff. "I didn't ask to be part of this story," he said. "But now that I am, I'm using it. Because this isn't about one flight. It's about all the ones that come after." The room clapped, not because he was famous, but because his voice had weight. And when he walked out of that building, he knew one thing for sure. He didn't just get his seat back that day. He made sure no one else would have to fight for theirs. After Caleb gave that speech at the airline's internal campaign launch, something shifted. The message, "Every seat matters," wasn't just posted on walls or printed on flight brochures. It started showing up in real changes. The airline launched a program for passengers to anonymously report any mistreatment in real time during flights. No more filling out forms later or waiting weeks for a response. Flight attendants were trained to handle it professionally, not defensively. Caleb helped test that system before it went live. There were also new guidelines about how passengers were greeted, especially in first class. Flight attendants were trained to ask for confirmation politely and respectfully, without assuming someone didn't belong there. It was small, but it mattered. Caleb got invited to speak at a conference for young changemakers a few months later. He was nervous. He didn't even like public speaking. But his aunt convinced him. "You don't have to be perfect," she said. "You just have to be real." So he stood on stage in front of hundreds of people, some older, some his age, and he told his story. Not with drama, just with truth. "I was judged because of how I looked," he said. "But I didn't want revenge. I wanted the system to change. I wanted fairness." After he finished, the crowd gave him a standing ovation. Not because he said anything flashy, but because he meant every word. Later that night, he got a message from someone who had watched the speech online. "My little brother saw your story. He's 13. He said it made him feel like he belongs anywhere he wants to be. Thank you." That message hit Caleb harder than any headline. He didn't respond right away. He just sat with it. For the first time, he felt proud, not just of how he handled the moment, but of what that moment had turned into. Meanwhile, his dad, Malcolm, stayed quiet in the public eye, like he always had. But his presence was felt everywhere. Executives across the industry started reaching out, not for favors, but for help. "How do we build trust again?" they asked. And Malcolm didn't hand them answers. He pointed to the people they weren't listening to before: passengers, staff, and even teenagers like Caleb. "Start there," he told them. Back at school, Caleb returned to regular life. Homework, friends, walking through hallways like any other kid. But he wasn't the same. Something had changed in him. Not fame, not ego, just confidence. He wasn't afraid to speak up in class anymore. He stood a little straighter. And when someone cracked a joke about him being famous now, he just smiled. "Nah," he said. "I'm just a guy who got tired of being quiet." Eventually, the airline reached out again. This time, not for another meeting. They invited him and the youth panel to help train new flight attendants. Caleb was surprised. "You want me to help teach?" "We want you to tell your story," the director said. "Not because you're perfect, but because you're the reason we're changing. So he did. Once a month, he sat in with new hires. He didn't lecture them. He didn't preach. He just shared what it felt like to be judged in seconds, and how that one moment affected everything that followed. Most of the new crew listened closely. Some even thanked him afterward. One woman came up and said, "My nephew's the same age as you. I'm glad you spoke up. It reminded me to pay more attention." Over time, the culture in that airline started to shift. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't fast, but it was real. And then, something unexpected happened. Caleb got a letter in the mail. Not an email, a handwritten letter, postmarked from another city. It was from a man named Terrence, a former passenger who'd once been kicked out of first class for not looking like he belonged. Decades ago. He wrote, "I'm 52 now. When it happened to me, nobody believed me. There were no cell phones, no social media. I was just angry and quiet. But then I saw your story, and for the first time I felt seen. Thank you for doing what I couldn't back then." Caleb kept that letter in a folder. Not to show off, just to remind himself why the fight mattered. And as he kept growing, through high school, then college, he never forgot the moment that started it all. The seat, the doubt, the phone call, the grounded plane, and how one unfair moment led to one powerful decision: to speak up, even when it was hard. Years later, when he was asked how it all began, he said something simple. "It started when someone told me I didn't belong, but I already knew I did." And that's what made all the difference.